Hello, this is Pranali and welcome to my psychotherapy channel. Today we are going to talk about the dimensions of psychotherapy. This is a framework I have developed on my own to understand how the components of psychotherapy help with different parts of improving as a person. This is from an anecdotal experience and from a lot of reading of different types of psychotherapies uh, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, schema therapy, mentalization based therapy, which is MBT, and psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is sometimes referred to as talk therapy. Now, why are there so many psychotherapies, right? And what is the correct or what is the most helpful psychotherapy? What are and these are very different types of activities, let's say, uh, which are called as therapy. When you go to a CBT therapist versus when you go to a talk therapist or a psychodynamic therapist, what you do and how you communicate with this person has a very different undertone and very different focus, and a different perspective through which you're trying to solve your problems. So, I have created a dimensional view of psychotherapy, which has 7 components. So, the 7 components are something which I have separated from what is included in psychotherapy. Okay, generally, the seventh part, which is psychopharmacology, is something which is separated from the first 6, which is the last one is often referred to as psychiatry, obviously, because a psychiatrist is the only one, or a doctor is the only one who can give you medications. But the other 7 are all combined into psychotherapy, but really they are not. Some of these things are included, and some of these things are included depending on who you go to and what type of therapy they practice. So let's understand. So the first one is psychoeducation. This will involve everything from what therapy is, how do you understand your distress, what is the severity of your distress, is it very low, is it very high, is it clinically significant, or is it based on what is going on in your life, in your environment. And there are many, what are your options in terms of treatment of whatever distress you or whatever symptoms you had when you went to the mental health professional. What are your options for treatment? Example, what are the different therapies which could help, or any other measures you could take? Are medications necessary? What is the role and intensity or duration of your medications which you require, and why? Okay, what are the different perspectives on your diagnosis? Okay, so the reason psychoeducation I feel is very important and should be a separate part of psychotherapy is because, as everyone who's watching this video, patients do want to know more. And if the doctor doesn't or the therapist doesn't explicitly talk about it, they're going to go on YouTube and Google and Chat GPT to find out the answers. And so, psychoeducation is often not explicitly emphasized at the start of therapy, which I think is a big mistake. I think there are reasons why therapists or psychiatrists do this, but I think it's still a mistake because everyone has a phone and they are anyway going to get some sort of education. Then I think it might be better to get it from the trained professional than on TikTok or on YouTube. But let's go on. That's the first, psychoeducation. Second is psychometric testing or diagnosis. And this is important because initially you'll just go with certain symptoms which you think you have, and then you don't know exactly what is the reason behind them, how could it be classified clinically. So we use colloquially things like anxiety, depression, or other types of distress, but really we don't know until we have actually tested on and clinically what the therapist or the psychiatrist has observed, and that's how we get to diagnosis. Now I will also talk about within the diagnosis the framework of DSM, which is the primary majority view followed, and there's an alternative view which is PDM, which is psychodiagnostic manual, like the DSM, which is the diagnostic statistical manual for mental health disorders. There's another one which is psychodynamic diagnostic manual, written by Nancy McWilliams, which is great, by the way, and we will talk about that as well, about how the diagnosis should be looked at. Then the third is counseling. Now, counseling and therapy are very different modalities. Counseling is basically advice given by a professional as to how best you could solve your problem, whereas psychotherapy necessarily discourages any type of advice and primarily focuses and emphasizes on accessing and understanding the unconscious processes going on within your mind, which might be contributing to your problems, and what you do about them is really what you might figure out on your own. You could discuss it in the therapy, but advice is strongly discouraged in the therapy process. Then the fourth is skills training. This is kind of in between what is psychotherapy and what is counseling, because skills training is specifically learning certain skills which could help you solve your problem, but it is not necessarily advice from a single person. Rather, it is maybe advice from a lot of therapists, which has been tested in research and clinical trials to see their efficacy. So I think what I call skills training is mainly included in the acronym therapies. So for example, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, has different skills like cognitive appraisal, identifying your thoughts, identifying certain cognitive distortions in your thoughts, or things like behavioral activation to counteract procrastination, or exposure therapy to face the situations which cause anxiety. Uh, Then there is DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. This has the skills of mindfulness, of thoughts, emotions, behaviors, of emotion regulation, being able to identify emotions, name them, and regulation practices. There are different visualization, breathing, and other kind of techniques which can help in emotional regulation. There's assertiveness skills, which can also be called included in skills training. So these things are not exactly advice, and these things are not exactly therapy, but today they are often practiced as therapy, because CBT, which is so called the most evidence based therapy, which has a lot of research behind it. And also there are a lot of studies showing short term efficacy, 8 to 12 weeks, showing a lot of effect. And so these are not specifically psychotherapy, which would be accessing and understanding the unconscious, or the sole focus of the therapy won't be that. So technically with CBT you are trying to access your unconscious, or either become aware of your unconscious beliefs and so on, but there is a more focus on correcting the things which you uncover, than rather than just observing and specifically understanding them, right? A lot of the framework in skills training is about how to correct what is happening, rather than simply understand why it is happening. Psychotherapy goes into the why, and skills training goes into the how or what to do to solve the problem, whereas psychotherapy will answer why do you have the problem, right? And so the fifth one, as I said, psychotherapy, is the older or the historically what is called talk therapy or psychodynamic therapy, and this has fallen out of fashion and considered to be not evidence based, which I think is completely not true. There are just certain nuances we need to understand as to why people have shifted from that model to more manualized versions of skills training. Okay. The sixth is building social competence. I think this is really important and really needs to be separated from everything else. And this relates back to our DSM versus PDM discussion, because DSM categorizes any type of distress as clinically relevant if it is causing a substantial dysfunction in the person's life. And this dysfunction can be in daily tasks, in the work or profession, and the social relationships. I think a lot of people can be functional, outwardly functional in all these areas while still not be mentally healthy and have clinically relevant um deficits in how their mind is structured. And this can really be distinguished by looking at their social competence. Today, as the world becomes more modern, as relationships become more transactional and transient, long term relationships are not the norm in certain cultures and grow increasingly even in eastern countries like India. The trend in urban areas is changing to higher levels of normalized dysfunction or lack of long term relationships, um, or the stability of long term relationships. So, social competence is really a hallmark of excellent mental health, because while the world is complicated, humans are complicated, and it is really difficult to be socially competent from personal experience who has mental health issues. The people who I admire most are able to balance between being socially competent, being able to connect with others, and also being their own person and following certain principles in their life. So this is while this is an outcome which is contributed by any of the previous three things of counseling, skills training, or psychotherapy. uh, I think this is something can be explicitly targeted at, and certain things do target it, like assertive training, but I think that's a very superficial kind of training, and we can go further into how social competence can be built. And the last is psychopharmacology. I will talk about this in terms of how medications can help in kind of managing our symptoms versus actually helping in long term change. Now, there isn't a lot of research I have personally done in this area, but I can talk about from general perspective what are the pros and cons of medication, and how in these dimensions sometimes they can be essential and even life saving, and sometimes it can be detrimental, can help you be functional but not really healthy. And so we will talk about all of these dimensions one by one in this video. Now let's go to the next one. So if we look at psychoeducation, right? This is so the first point I would say is understanding possible causes of distress. I think this is very important, because while you might identify something as what is distressing you, the symptoms, whether you're anxious, depressed, procrastinating, um, or you're having trouble in your relationships, are having conflict. Um, yeah, there can be various different things which you might have trouble with, but psychoeducation could tell you the possible causes of distress, and by this I specifically mean biological versus psychological causes of distress. There is a lot of debate within psychology, and by no means this is settled whether biology or psychology is the predominant uh, driver of mental health issues. Obviously both of them contribute, but what contributes more, what is the major part, is something which different people within this profession will believe differently. Psychiatrists are more likely to believe in the biological determinism kind of framework, whereas psychologists are more likely to believe that okay, there is possibility of a lot of change, and a lot of this might be just psychological and childhood and other things. So there is a mixture between the both, but whatever distress you have, the reasons for those distress could be understood by your personal history and the clinical experience to distinguish between what is innate versus which is innate to your biology versus something which had been driven by your development. Okay. Now, second is what is the clinically severity of distress versus normal human life distress. Again, I think psychoeducation here is important, because depending on who you go to and the personal bias of that professional, they are going to see certain things as clinical distress versus normal human distress. This will also differ with culture, where certain things might be considered normal human experience in the East, or just more uh, less prosperous societies, whereas more prosperous societies might classify even certain distresses as clinically or very severe or dysfunctional, because their standards of what is uh, acceptable level of distress is different. Now, the third is treatment options. I think this is very, very, very essential. From personal experience, this is not really um, discussed in the start, which is a big problem. For me, I went through a long duration of therapy, about 1.5 years, about more or less 60 to 80 sessions, and there was never a discussion what is the aim of the psychotherapy. I think while I obviously wanted to reduce my distressing symptoms, I was also really focused on building a life which I thought was worth living, and building the positive skills, the ability to have more positive experiences by improving certain social and self discipline skills. So, the treatment options are two. Some practitioners will focus on the causes, which can have an effect on reducing symptoms as well as improving your life, whereas other treatment options focus on the symptoms. What are your major distressing symptoms? For example, something like suicidal ideation or self harm. These are very clinically relevant symptoms and very severe, and you and one so certain therapies are only geared toward reducing the symptoms, and so which is of course important, and the patient does want that, but often explicit discussion needs to be taken place within psychoeducation as to, do we stop there, or are we aiming towards whatever goal the patient has, or is the practitioner of the view that there are just certain limitations as to what are the limits of the ability to change for a person. Okay, so this would be kind of balancing between cure or kind of changing a lot, changing at the personality level, versus just managing and reducing distressing symptoms and becoming as functional as possible. Okay, now the other part which can be also included in psychoeducation is lifestyle factors that can improve symptoms versus make them worse. Now, in the modern world, there are a lot of lifestyle factors: sleep, internet, exercise, food. I think these are like the four, and of course, like social connection. All these have been disrupted in the modern world due to, uh, due to fast food and like the phones. The phones also affect the social connection, where more and more you have less contact face to face and more contact online. So, and sleep is also affected by this. We work a lot, we are on the phone a lot, so we are sleeping less and less. And so these kind of food, internet, sleep, social connection, all of these kind of affect what are the symptoms you're experiencing, and sometimes just the stress level can reduce with really focus on these issues. Also, I included exercise. Exercise is like a very central part of being a human. It is evolutionarily, I think, very important, and more people don't have time to do that. So psychoeducation should include the fact that while your distress could be clinically significant, you should at least initially try to fix certain factors in this area and see what the difference is. Is it just possible that you might be more resilient if these 5 factors are improved greatly, and you're just able to withstand the distress, find functional ways to adapt to your situation, and like problem solve on your own if you have enough energy by having good hygiene around these 5 topics. And I think this should be explored in psychoeducation. Things like supplementation, vitamin D deficiency, certain physiological factors, exposure to sunlight, these can create huge differences in how our body is regulating itself, how our nervous system is affected by these factors, and this should be definitely included in psychoeducation. This is there on the internet, but I think an explicit focus in the doctor's office on these things could also be helpful. So this was first the psychoeducation. Let's look at second, which is psychometric testing or a way to have diagnosis. There's the difference between DSM versus PDM, and also the use of psychometric testing for other for like um, assessing skills or competencies, adaptive mechanisms of your mind to deal with life versus deficits in certain areas. So psychometric testing can be used not just for diagnosis but for these purposes, to help the therapist, counselor, whoever, to really guide you in improving. So let's look at first the testing itself. And so a lot of times things like depression, anxiety can be symptoms and not root causes. And this is the major difference between the DSM and psychodynamic diagnostic manual, where the DSM focuses on the symptoms and the severity of the symptoms depending on what functional aspect of life it is affecting, and also the severity of distress based on self-report or self-experience of the distress. Whereas the psychodynamic model tries to understand what is the structure of the mind, structure of the personality, which is leading to these symptoms. So it looks at things like depression as a symptom, like akin to fever, which can have many different causes and not itself a disease. Fever itself is not a disease, it's a symptom of something else going wrong. Whereas the DSM will just focus on the depression, it will try to find a cause, but the main focus, it will be classifying the disorder itself as depression rather than on the basis of what is causing the depression. So for example, in the psychodynamic model, a narcissist person who is not really been able to achieve the self-image that they have will become depressed, right? A successful narcissistic person might have found a social environment where they are getting the reinforcement of the self-image they want, whereas a narcissist who is not in that environment could get depressed because their self-image is now shattered, having not found an environment or a way to reach that potential, right? And so the difference or depression can be by other things, right? It can be just grief, normal grief. So the cause is very important. So the symptoms of depression might be similar, but if the cause is different, then the way you treat is different according to the psychodynamic manual. Now, a lot of these psychometric tests are self-reports. Also, of course, the clinical observation is important, and the practitioner, professional, especially a clinical psychologist, will supplement their understanding on the basis of clinical observation along with the self-report tests. But it has to be emphasized that a lot of the self-report, while it has been tested and there are measures for testing internal consistency so that the patient is not just kind of answering the questions like they think they should rather than being honest about it. I mean, also whether they are capable of honesty is a different thing altogether. While I think it is very useful to use personality tests, these are MCM, I will not go into detail, but these are self-report personality tests or depression or anxiety distress scales. These can be useful, but the clinical observation is something which is much more useful. Now, apart from the diagnostic tests, there are a lot of standardized tests to assess like cognitive and emotional skills, reflective functioning. There's something called an attachment interview. There are tests which are either self-report or actually external testing of attention and perception. What are the differences or biases between that? The personality structure can be assessed either with the tests and with clinical observation in the process of therapy, talking to the person. And so I think when I talk about skills training, a lot of the times in psychotherapy, we just go through the tests which help us in diagnosis. But there aren't a lot of tests which are done just to assess, okay, which are the areas which are weak or strong in this person, and then whichever the area needs more work could be focused on in therapy, or the skills of those areas could be focused on in skills training type of therapies, right? And so I think this is a must need improvement which is needed in our kind of pipeline of how we reach the doctor's office and what are the next steps. So while the first has to be psychoeducation, second has to be that there are a lot of tests which can tell you which areas we could work on and focus on. The third, as I've written here, is case history with symptoms. And yes, difference between DSM PDM I've already discussed. But I think it's very important for the practitioner to have a clinical case formulation and a history of you. So the history cannot be just about what are your symptoms right now and maybe a brief history about your family or childhood. It has to be much more detailed. A lot of the history in terms of your development could be just explicit in the start, and of course you will delve into it more as you go into like the psychodynamic psychotherapy part if you get that kind of treatment. But if you're just going to go through CBT DBT skills training, I think the case history is very important because it helps distinguish between just kind of irrational or whatever in CBT. Like, before you're trying to change something, you need to understand what was the adaptiveness of these certain behaviors or patterns of thoughts, emotions, behaviors, perceptions which you have. So rather than directly jumping to changing them, correcting them, you need to understand why you had them. And so even a person who is just doing skills training does need to take this case history, because otherwise you're going to try to change something which is actually maybe having an adaptive mechanism in your life, or at least had one in your history. And so it's important to understand, because otherwise you can start feeling guilty or judge yourself a lot for things and see them as like irrational or having no meaning, when in fact they have a very good meaning and a very good reason to exist. The last is clinical case formulation. I think a lot of practitioners have a very basic idea of what a clinical case formulation is. Only if you're trained in the psychodynamic train of thought can you really make a clinical case formulation which is detailed, deep, talks about your development, and also a lot of relevant things which really helps us understand a person holistically and at a deeper level. I think the other clinical case formulations in like CBT, DBT, or other things are not that deep as they are in PDM, and the practitioner that is not really understanding the patient at that deep level to be able to give good advice or focus on the right skills sometimes. That's my take on the psychometric diagnosis part. Now, third is counseling. Now, I think many people don't know this, especially in India. Now, I'm making this for a large audience on YouTube, but I will try to focus on what is there in India and what I know culturally or through the internet and through some friends of how it is outside. So in India, a lot of therapists just will give you advice. In general, we are a culture of giving advice. We just give advice to any random person we meet. And so counseling can be useful for people who are functional already and are just dealing with a particular issue. For example, career. They're confused about what to pursue and so on, and they're just trying to think through what are the pros and cons of including certain careers or not. And somebody with a understanding of psychology and understanding of human mental health and happiness might be able to provide a good perspective and then advice to the person in terms of these very specific things, as long as they are functional, right? But counseling can also be just depending on the psycho education the person has provided. I think counseling should be a different role than what a person in psychotherapy does. Right now, I don't think there is any framework where you have two different things. It just depends on the patient, what he chooses, and it depends on the practitioner if he feels comfortable giving advice or not. And some will just give advice, and also on culture, as I said, in India there's a lot of therapists you will find who just give advice rather than not give advice and focus on understanding. And so the counseling part, I think, should be treated as a different person than the person who gives psychotherapy, who discusses the different perspectives with you, discusses your distress, the possible causes for your distress, what are your goals, what are the possible things maybe from the different perspectives in psychology or psychotherapeutic treatments, and then together you form a collaborative treatment plan as to maybe in the start reducing distressing symptoms, and then later actually being able to reach higher functional goals as you and the counselor decides is reasonable and realistic. And so the counselor can also be a person who can provide you support and advice for roadmap for change and reaching desired goals. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So generally psychotherapy, especially the psychodynamic part, doesn't necessarily provide emotional support. Their sole focus is really on understanding you and having a very neutral stance. So while they will be human and they will share your pain, they might not give you direct support or affirmations and things like that, but that is a necessary part a patient might need initially when they're really distressed, and they might not have anybody else in their life and they're coming to this professional. They might expect that in the beginning, and until their symptoms are reduced, they might not understand why that is not the only way they can be helped, and that long term help might include not getting this support from anybody and building that support on their own in their life, and not using the therapist as a crutch to get that support. And so I think there needs to be two people, one a counselor and one a therapist, where the counselor is focused on like the perspective view and kind of like a, not a friend, but kind of a guide through this journey, who can give advice, who can give psychoeducation, and who lets the patient know what they actually think and what is the different knowledge they have. Now this plays an important role for the patient to feel like they understand where they are going, but this can become a problem if it comes from a psychotherapist, because the patient, depending on what the issue is on a deeper level, might feel uncomfortable or not as safe to share certain parts of their life if they're aware what the therapist thinks already. Generally in psychodynamic psychotherapy, the therapist is not revealing too much at all, and a lot of the reactions of the patients are information the therapist can get, because the patient starts treating the therapist as other people in their life, especially their attachment figures, and it's kind of like a mirror which the therapist gets to see what they're enacting. And if the patient knows too much about what the therapist thinks, about what they should do, how they can change, and a lot of these things, it might be more difficult to conduct a more psychodynamic psychotherapy. And so I think there can be a different person for this counseling part, who can also provide like a long-term roadmap about how the change will happen. I think there are certain complications when the same person tries to understand you and also help you to change, because it's a balance between these two things, right? Now, the last one which I'm saying here is focus on reducing immediate and most distressing issues and building working alliance. And so I think in the start, the patient might not be ready to, or might not really be concerned with really understanding what is going on at a deeper level, and might not be ready to accept the actual reasons why that is, but they do need to reduce their symptoms, because they might have become very dysfunctional in their life. They might have left school, they might have lost a job due to conflict, and these are very important functional aspects. If not treated immediately, will not allow the patient to continue the therapy itself, because let's face it, therapy can be very expensive and very time consuming, and if the rest of your life is not going well, you might not have the energy and resources to put into therapy. And so I think DSM and the skills training types of therapies do a good job in focusing on this area, and I think that should be termed as counseling. And the counselor can go to the next part, which is the skills training, right? Depending on the first three, like the psychoeducation is given, the diagnostics is done, maybe diagnostics are even used to kind of understand what are the different strengths and weaknesses. The counseling has been done and a roadmap has been built with the patient collaboratively to understand how to first reduce the symptoms and then how to even improve life further. And then the focus the counselor can themselves help in is skills training. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy is talking about cognition and behavior. DBT has more focus on emotion. There are many different types of these acronym therapies, but the 4 levels of change I think can happen at the cognitive level, the emotional level, the behavioral level, and the social level, right? And you have different skills. Like for cognition, cognitive aspects, you have the ability to introspect on yourself, understand your thoughts, identify what thoughts are coming in your mind, then assessing and modifying thoughts, assessing like the rationality or the logic behind the thoughts. Is it reasonable, unreasonable, things like that. In CBT specifically, there's a process of first thoughts, rules, assumptions, and then beliefs, core beliefs of what you have and how it is changing how you think about things, how it might affect how you feel about things, and then what are the behaviors you choose to do due to these beliefs. And so this can be the cognitive skills which can be learned through like worksheets, self work. You can be guided through them with the help of the counselor, but this is something you can do on your own as well. Then there's the emotional ability to feel emotions in the mind and the body. This can often be a problem where if you have repressed, suppressed, or dissociated from your emotions, this can be a skill which can be built up through the practices of mindfulness, body scan, relaxation techniques, and stuff like that, just to slow down and try to identify different sensations internally and externally from your senses. Then to identify, to name these emotions, often people have something called alexithymia, where they're not able to feel, but they're also not very good at differentiating between positive or negative emotions. So either they're just depressed or feeling bad, sad, rather than, like they're afraid, or they are angry, or they are sad, or they are grieving. So there are like levels of different distress or even positive emotions which they are not able to express. So naming the emotions can be very good. This is especially a whole module of emotional regulation within DBT teaches this. Then understanding the purpose of emotions. So cognitively, this can be just psychoeducation, where you understand why we have emotions, why they have evolved, what is the purpose of specific emotions like fear, getting away from danger, anger, protecting yourself, fighting, different things, right? Then emotional abilities include ability to withstand distressing emotions. Now this is a very complicated aspect, but in some degree this can be learnt at least at the controlled level, if not at the automatic level, how to withstand distress, different kinds of distress. Then regulate emotions using mindfulness, breathing, and meditation techniques. And so these are kind of skills which you can kind of learn with skills training with different people, and it can be guided through your counselor. You can read books, you can do these exercises, join classes for example like breathing, meditation techniques, yoga, mindfulness meditation, things like that. Then there's behavioral skills training, and this primarily includes the ability to change your behaviors by inserting like a space between what is happening internally or externally and then what your response is by actions, words, even like non-verbal facial expressions and things like that. And so there can be like a conscious training of introducing a gap, and this is specifically like kind of working on impulsivity, that there's a stimulus, either internally thought or externally something happened and you immediately respond. So changing behavior would include like practicing a different response to a same stimulus slowly by having this gap in between. Now there are more specific behavioral training things people can do, but this is the kind of core principle of it. Then continuing to the skills training, there's the social aspect. And so this can include assertive communication, which is included both in CBT, DBT. And this is the ability to cooperate and negotiate between own and others' interests effectively without any consistent patterns of either self-sacrifice, not thinking of your own, or domination, or thinking only of yourself and dominating the other person, right? And I have included a diagram here of mentalization, and if you see, this has like the 4 aspects of self and other, and then cognitive and affective. Are you able to think of yourself and others only in cognitive ways or also in affective ways, understanding the states of mind that way? And this is called mentalization, and it's included in the mentalization based therapy. And this can include skills like perspective taking, which can be cognitive, theory of mind. This is very important for like social skills, mindfulness, which I mentioned in like the emotional part, which can kind of deal with alexithymia as well, like in terms of the affective aspect of how you're able to feel. Empathy, are you able to really see? This includes perspective taking, but it is more affective rather than cognitive, right? And so all these aspects are included in mentalization based therapy, and I will talk about these much more in building social competence. Now it can also be that as you are gaining like different of these skills, these can be kind of used to reduce your distressing symptoms and reduce anything which is causing dysfunction in your life. But as individuals gain insight into their condition and start addressing immediate concerns, they learn these specific behavioral, emotional, and cognitive skills. And through the training of these skills, things like stress management, assertiveness, mindfulness, this will enhance daily functioning and resilience, and will give the patient something very practical to manage their distress and manage their distress at the emotional and cognitive level. And this can be very kind of calming, because a lot of times some distress just feels out of control. The person is very confused what to do, they don't understand, and this can kind of ground them to at least know, okay, there is something I can do. Now this doesn't explain to them everything, but it reduces the immediate panic of, okay, this is what do I do now, what do I do? And this can be like very practical advice and very focused on the strengths and weaknesses of the person, and can be provided by a counselor. Now let's go to the fifth part, which is psychotherapy and accessing and understanding the unconscious. I think this is very much varied depending on which practitioner you go into and the bias of the practitioner themselves, the way they were taught in their own education, because psychodynamic psychotherapy has really fallen out of vogue in certain areas. It's considered, like pseudoscientific or not really evidence-based and things like that, which is not really true. I think it helps you understand really at a deep level many different things. And so the first thing to talk about this can be a step beyond just managing intense distress, which is interfering with the functioning in like daily tasks, work, relationships, etc. And a lot of patients will want this. It's unlike physical health, where physical health you might just not want to feel some pain or have some problem. You might not necessarily want to become healthy and be able to like exercise and lift weights or like do difficult, challenging physical exercises. As long as you can function and do all things, maybe you don't really want to become healthy. And so that model of treating illnesses is okay. With physical health, I think most people have other avenues to become more healthy. But with mental health, this is very different. With mental health, you live with your mind all the time. With your physical body, you don't need to function at a higher level all the time. But with mental health, even if it's not causing a dysfunction, it can be just internal sense of dysfunction or like unhealthy thoughts, emotions, states of minds, which can torment you at every waking moment. And so many people want to move beyond the level of just reducing distress and go to like a happier, more hopeful place than, maybe they're not very distressed, maybe they're not very depressed or anxious, but they are kind of numb. And I think a lot of people are in this state because you can numb yourself with like food, internet, things I mentioned before, and not be dysfunctional, be functional. Maybe you have a good financial situation and you might have some friends, you might not have a relationship, but many people are not in relationships, and it's not, it's more and more accepted to not want a relationship, to not want marriage, to not want children. And so in that case, are you really healthy? And so I think this part really moves beyond the distress and moves into the depths of us. Now at this relative, as I said, the first four are like trying to get you kind of more stable, and this can include medications. But once you're more in a stable state where you have tools and skills to manage a lot of distress, deeper exploration of the causes and origins of the symptoms or distress, moving to the why, behind why I have these thoughts, why I have these emotions, where are they coming from, why do I behave this way, what does it give me, what is the reinforcement for this behavior, what is my attention and perception focus. Okay, and this is ideally done with psychodynamic individualized approach rather than the manualized acronym therapy types I mentioned before. They can help, and obviously when you learn the skills training, you will become aware of thoughts, emotions, behaviors, attention, and perception focus. But the focus will not be on the why, especially the why of you individually. You might have like a more general idea of why this can happen, but not really specific to you in a personal way during your development what happened, how your environment was and how your biology was, and how both of them interacted to make you who you are, and how that might not be serving you anymore, but maybe it served you at a certain point in the past. Now, in this part, the patient gets to explore why, despite learning all the skills and knowing the adaptive thoughts and behaviors, they lose agency to varying degrees and repeat the patterns they are trying to avoid. I think this, to a YouTube audience or anything, any people who are really into self-help will resonate with, where you know everything you're supposed to do, right? You know all the right things you're supposed to do, but you just fail. You try and sometimes you succeed, and there are periods of success and you're happy, but then you again fall down. You again make the same mistakes. You fall into the same patterns, and you're like, why? Why are you like this? Why are you doing this? I mean, I don't know if you resonate with that. I really resonate with it. And the questions to these answers, and to really change at that level, and not in a controlled way, but change something so internally that automatically these patterns change. I think the answer to that is only this type of psychodynamic psychotherapy, which, mind you, will be long term, because the patterns and things which you have formed have been for many, many years in your life. So to change your brain at that level, to change your automatic behaviors, thoughts, emotions, will require much more time. Now, I don't believe it has to take years and years, like 10 years. I think it can be made more streamlined, but it will take more than 8 to 12 weeks, definitely. Okay. Now, this part strengthens the ability to use flexible and adaptive coping mechanisms. I think this is very important. A lot of the manualized therapy have like a correct answer of how to do things, and you know what is a good state to be in and not a good state to be in. But I think the concept of defense mechanisms and the kind of, there are maladaptive defense mechanisms or kind of overly rigid defense mechanism you use to deal with life. But if you are becoming flexible, you can use the defense mechanisms appropriate to the situation, and then they can become adaptive. So being defending either cognitively, emotionally, with different things is not bad. You don't always have to feel everything. You don't always have to be rational. But there are places where you do need to be able to change these modes of thinking. And this is something good in mentalization based therapy, where there is this talk about like different modes of being, cognitive, affective, and different kinds of things, which can be important. But I think there's a much broader variation and range presented in the psychodynamic view. Then this stage also involves more intensive therapeutic techniques such as free association, dream analysis, and other interpretive methods, aiming to resolve deeper emotional conflicts and promote significant personal growth. So these are some things I've mentioned. There are many more, like transference, and ability for the therapist to see things like projective identification take place, where you're kind of projecting certain things and making the therapist feel different things which you expect to be treated as. And here you're really trying to get into your unconscious. There is a level of conscious where you feel you have certain thoughts, behaviors, which is kind of dealt with in the skills part and the other therapy modalities. But there's something more unconscious which can come out once in a while, and these things which I've mentioned, like free association, dream analysis, is kind of a glimpse into your unconscious, which you might not be aware of yourself. And it's not necessarily that you lie to yourself, like to yourself or others, but it's just deeper into you that you're not aware of it. And this increasing this awareness, bringing this unconscious forces which guide your behavior, which don't allow you to do the right thing, is coming to the conscious slowly. And this takes a lot of effort to accept, and you do need another person to have this acceptance. This is very difficult to do on your own. The skills training part, a lot of it you can do it on your own, but this part of understanding yourself at a deeper level is best done in the presence of another person who's really trained in trying to help you understand this process. Okay. Now the sixth one, as I mentioned, is building social competence. I will make further videos on this part, specifically in relation to mentalization based therapy, which I think is the best model for understanding this. But a lot of the personality structure which is within you, which is how you understand yourself, others, and the relationship between you and others, can only be resolved if you work on this fifth part of psychotherapy, accessing the unconscious, and this affects your social relationships a lot. Your social relationships are not just assertive training, okay? That's very superficial and conscious. A lot of it is unconscious. The attachment relationships in your life, relationship with your parents, your spouse, your significant other, your children, your very close friends. This is not something you'll resolve with assertive training and with boundaries and all this kind of very explicit way of dealing with relationships. I think it's helpful in the start to do it if you have very dysfunctional patterns, but eventually to go to a competent level, this has to come at a more automatic and unconscious level, okay? And this can happen only with the fifth part which I mentioned. Certain more explicit models exist within MBT, which I will discuss later. So as I said, extension to the previous part, many patterns develop due to our developmental trajectory during childhood and adolescence. Exploring the deficits in this environment can answer the origins of current deficits. The social environment during infancy, childhood, and adolescence molds a lot of our relation to self, to others, and the relation between both. Deficits in these not only affect social functioning but also adequate development and integration of emotion and cognition during crucial part of brain development. I think this is very important to understand, and there will be a lot of discussion of social aspects in the fifth dimension of psychotherapy, where you will explore a lot of your relationships, especially close attachment relationships, and how they formed and are related to a lot of your emotions, cognitions, and behaviors. And understanding the effects in the fifth and the sixth part can really help you holistically understand and change all these levels of perception, cognition, behavior, emotion, and social relationships. And the last part, so the continuing the building social competence. So as I mentioned, I will make another video about mentalizing, but a particular part of this is not just like setting boundaries and things like that, but there's an inherent unpredictability rather, of understanding other people's minds emotionally and cognitively, and that is an ability you need to develop in different ways depending on what deficits you have. And ability to conceptualize yourself and others more in a more complex way rather than black and white, right? You need to be able to accept flaws within you and others, and this is a core capacity which allows you to really connect with others. The ability to hold this concept of self and others, which is reliable and realistic across different emotional states, and ability to have a psychological separation between self and other, which is healthy without impeding possibility of deep connection and cooperation. And I think this is these like four abilities are very important to function socially, which cannot be covered in the language of like boundaries and assertiveness. These are important, but they don't build social competence. They might help you be socially functional and not get into conflict. So they reduce conflict, but they don't deepen connections. Okay, they, in fact, I would say, promote disconnection and like a artificiality in your social relationships. Okay, now going to the last part, which is psychopharmacology. I won't talk too much about this because I haven't researched it in detail, but concurrent with other therapies, this can be introduced when necessary. The use of medications to manage symptoms and support the therapy process. Sometimes people are so distressed and so dysfunctional that that medications can really be a lifesaver, especially if you don't have access to good therapy and good mental health care. Then medications are cheap and effective, and so I am no one who like disses medications. They can be helpful, but they have their disadvantages as well. Short term they are very good, but long term change could be impeded by them. Understanding and applying psychopharmacology involves assessing the therapeutic benefits and managing the side effects. So while they can help you in becoming functional, they can have side effects like lower sex drive, not ability to think, dampening emotions which might be necessary to make changes in your life, things with like sleep, like the many other blunting of emotions. So side effects are there which can be sometimes very harmful. balancing between stabilizing dysfunction and not numbing strong emotions in need of understanding and processing. And this becomes really helpful when you go to psychotherapy, very important, because while you don't want to go into like complete chaos and dysfunction and distress, which affects your life deeply, you also want to feel your emotions and understand your emotions naturally. If you're using medications to like really very strong medications and there isn't a balance and they're really blunted, the psychotherapeutic work will be less effective. Now there are also cases where the medications themselves can help in like neurogenesis and changing brain structures, neuroplasticity, but I haven't looked into it too much, and I will make a video once I do. Also, there's a part of considering the patient's attitudes and beliefs towards medications, and I think psychoeducation is important here, where the distinction between reducing symptoms versus long-term use should be differentiated. Using it for like biological purposes versus just practical purposes of becoming functional faster should be discussed. Not like that it might not be the you need it. So if you take medications you definitely have something biological. That's not the case. It's just you are just in a state which could be helped with medications, not necessarily you are just doomed to use medications all the time. So I think that the beliefs around like feeling shame around taking medications can sometimes be very strong and could only be addressed through psychotherapy, which is the fifth part. And so this is like a complicated issue. Then this stage supports the overall treatment plan by addressing biological aspects of mental disorders. Now definitely there is a reality to biological aspects, being more impulsive, like personality traits of like neuroticism, the amount of negative emotion you are more susceptible to, or the sensitivity to feel negative emotions, openness, like all these different things are like mood disorders like bipolar, and like a fluctuation between your emotional states of very extreme highs and lows definitely have biological underpinnings, and sometimes medications are necessary, maybe lifetime or maybe for a longer time, till a deeper dynamic psychological change has happened where you have become resilient or strong enough to manage some of these symptoms on your own. But still, maybe sometimes in huge amounts of stress, biology can override your psychology, and in those cases medications can become very important. Okay, so this was my all of like understanding the different dimensions of psychotherapy, and I hope you really got a lot out of this framework. I think this is a very good way of understanding psychotherapy. I wish this was kind of the like the chronology or the pipeline of how it went. Unfortunately, it is not. It is kind of all over the place, not really organized. Different practitioners do their thing. Some focus more on skills training, some focus more on giving advice, others focus only on understanding and not changing anything, right? And so I think there needs to be a balance between everything, and this is my attempt to explain all this in a clear fashion, hopefully, and I hope you enjoyed it. Leave comments, ask questions, share your experiences. Also, psychotherapists react. What do you think I got wrong, got right? And definitely, most important thing, check out Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual. Check out David Puder, Jonathan Shedler, Nancy Williams. These have been great clinicians which I have learned a lot from. And I will also give credit to all the manualized therapies, CBT, DBT, because they do focus more on changing rather than just understanding, which I think is a legitimate concern with psychotherapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, where you can go and understand, but nothing changes. And so all of this has merit. We just need to put it all together and try to improve it together. Okay, thank you.